Section 1.5, Addition and Subtraction of Real Numbers. In the last section we discussed the concept of an opposite. And what's special about opposites is that, when you add them up, the sum is 0. The sum of any number and its opposite is 0. And in symbols we would write a plus the opposite of a is equal to 0. So let's see a couple of examples of how we can use this idea. We're asked to determine the opposite of the number and calculate the sum of the number and its opposite. So if we're given -7, then the opposite is 7. Alright, and -7 plus 7 is 0, as they are opposites. Second number we are given is the square root of 15. Well, its opposite is negative square root of 15. And the square root of 15 plus negative square root of 15 is 0. Again, since they are opposites. Now, how do we generally add numbers? To add numbers that are either both positive or both negative, add their absolute values. Their sum has the same sign as the two numbers. So if you're adding numbers with the same sign, you keep this common sign and you add the values. To add two numbers with opposite signs, find the absolute value of the numbers, subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. The sum will have the same sign as the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. And again, if the two numbers are opposites, their sum is 0. So if we have different signs, we keep the sign of the larger number and we take the difference of the numbers. All right, so let's see some examples. -9 plus 7. These have different signs. We keep the sign of the larger. -9 is, in a sense, larger than 7 under absolute value. I'm not talking about greater than or less than, rather larger. All right, the absolute value of -9 is 9. The absolute value of 7 is 7. 9 is larger than 7. So I know that the sum will be negative. Now I need to find a difference between the two numbers. Putting the larger number first, 9 subtract 7 is 2, and the opposite of 2 is -2. So -9 add 7 is -2. -10 plus -23, same signs. Both negative, we keep the common sign. We add the values. 10 plus 23 is 33, so the sum is -33. Now here we have -5/12 plus 1/6. A little bit more difficult to determine which is larger in this case, because they have different denominators. So let's build up the fractions so that they have a common denominator. The LCD would be 12. So leaving the first fraction alone and multiplying the second fraction by 2's gives us -5/12 plus 2/12. All right, the 5 is larger than the 2, so I know the sign will be negative. Subtracting the values, 5/12 minus 2/12 is 3/12, so we'd have -3/12. And reducing the fraction by a factor of 3, -1/4. So here are some more examples. Now would be a good time to pause and try these on your own. -2/9 plus -1/12. All right, let's find the LCD. The LCD for 9 and 12. would be 36. Building up the first fraction by a factor of 4 would give negative 8 over 36. And building up the second fraction by a factor of 3 would give negative 3 over 36. Since they have the same sign, we keep the common sign. And adding the values, 8 plus 3, 11 over 36. And that will not reduce. 4.3 plus negative 2.9. All right, different signs. Keep the sign of the larger value. 4.3 is larger than 2.9, so it'll be positive. And we would subtract the values. So really, this is the same as 4.3 minus 2.9. And if I remember, let's see, to subtract decimal numbers, we line up the decimal. We have to borrow here. And subtracting gives us 1.4. Negative 103 plus negative 134 would be a negative, and they have the same sign, so negative. And adding the values would give us negative 237. Subtraction. For any real numbers a and b, a subtract b is equivalent to a plus the opposite of b. Any subtraction can be rewritten as addition of the opposite. So when we're dealing with real numbers, we don't generally think about subtraction. Instead, we think of addition of the opposite. For example, if we had 12 subtract 33, we instead think of this as 12 add the opposite of 33, or 12 add negative 33. Now, using our rules for addition, this would be negative, and subtracting the values, we'd have 33 minus 12, and so this would give us negative 21. So 12 subtract 33 is negative 21. Negative 4 subtract negative 12 is negative 4 add the opposite of negative 12 is 12. Negative 4 plus 12 would be a positive number because 12 is larger than 4. So we know it's positive, and we would subtract the values. So it would be positive, and I'm putting the positive there on purpose just to remind us. We have 12 minus 4. 12 subtract 4 is 8, and so we'd have positive 8. 3/7 subtract 5/9. Again, I'm going to find a common denominator first. LCD would be 63 here. Building up the first fraction by a factor of 9 gives 27 over 63. Subtract. Building up the second fraction by a factor of 7 gives 35 over 63. So now that I have a common denominator, 27 minus 35, I don't like that, so let me rewrite it as 25, I can write this as 27 minus 35 over 63. And now for that 27 minus 35, I'll think of it as 27 plus negative 35 over 63. 27 plus negative 35 would be negative. Since 35 is larger than 27, we would subtract the values. 35 minus 27, and that's over 63. 35 minus 27 is 8, so we would have negative 8 over 63. Here are some more subtraction exercises. Now would be a good time to pause. Try these on your own. Negative 9.6 subtract negative 5.7 is the same as negative 9.6 add positive 5.7, which would be a negative number, as the 9.6 is larger, and we would subtract the values. Borrowing correctly, we would have negative 3.9. Building up the fractions here using a common denominator of 24. So the first fraction by a factor of 3 and the second fraction by a factor of 2. We would have negative 9 24ths minus 10 24ths, which would be negative 9 minus 10 over 24, or negative 9 plus negative 10 over 24. We're adding numbers with the same value, same sign, excuse me. So we would be negative, and we would add the values. 9 plus 10 is 19 over 24. Negative 19 24ths. 38 subtract negative 27 is the same as 38 plus positive 27. And now using standard addition gives us 65. So here are some mixed practice exercises. And again, this would be a good time to pause and try these on your own before I do them. Negative 11 plus 8 minus 10. Well, the first thing I would do is simplify the negative 11 plus 8. Negative 11 plus 8 becomes negative 3, because 11 is larger than 8, so we keep the sign of the 11. And we subtract the values. Negative 3 minus 10 is the same as negative 3 plus negative 10, which gives us, since they're the same sign, a negative, and adding the values, 3 plus 10, 13. One fourth minus negative 2/5 plus negative 3/20. All right, the first thing I'm going to do here is get a common denominator for all of these fractions. 20 is going to work for all of the fractions. So I build up the first fraction by a factor of 5, and the second fraction by a factor of 4. And that would give me 5 over 20 minus negative 8 over 20 plus negative 3 over 20. So we'd have 5 over 20 plus positive 8 over 20 plus negative 3 over 20. Right? I rewrote the subtraction as addition of the opposite. Adding the first fractions, 5 over 20 plus 8 over 20, using a basic idea here, that's 13 over 20, plus negative 3 over 20. Well, that's the same as 13 plus negative 3 over 20. 13 is larger than negative 3, so we keep the sign of the larger, positive. Subtracting the values, 13 minus 3 is 10. So we have 10 over 20, which simplifies to 1/2. All right, in the last example here, we have some absolute values thrown in as well, so be careful here. Working inside the first absolute values, we have negative 5 minus negative 3. That's negative 5 plus 3, which is negative 2. Working inside the second, we have negative 6 plus 8, which is positive 2. So this becomes the absolute value of negative 2 minus the absolute value of 2. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. The absolute value of 2 is also 2, and 2 subtract 2 is 0. Let's do a little bit more work with translating and evaluating. Here we are asked to write an arithmetic expression for the given phrase and then simplify it. Negative 20 decreased by 8. Well, the phrase decreased by tells us to subtract. So we need negative 20 subtract 8. So there's the phrase. And evaluating it would give us negative 20 plus negative 8, changing the subtraction to addition of the opposite. Negative 20 plus negative 8, same signs, keep the sign, negative, add the values. 20 plus 8 is 28. The difference between 1/2 and 3/4. Difference is, again, a phrase or a word for subtract. So the difference between 1/2 and 3/4 would be 1/2 subtract 3/4. All right, finding a common denominator of 4. Building up the first fraction by a factor of 2. We would have 2 over 4 minus 3 over 4, which is 2 minus 3 over 4. 2 minus 3 is 2 plus negative 3. And 2 plus negative 3 is negative 1, so we have negative 1/4. And we'll finish off the section with an application. The greatest temperature range on Earth occurs in Siberia, where the temperature can vary between 98 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer and negative 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. Find the difference between these two temperatures. The difference, again, would be 98 subtract negative 90. So the difference tells us to subtract, and we're just writing the two numbers. All right, and remembering that subtraction can be thought of as addition of the opposite, we would have 98 plus the opposite of negative 90 is 90, and 98 plus 90 is 188. Remembering the units, the difference in the temperatures would be 188 degrees Fahrenheit.